Good afternoon. I hope everybody had a great lunch, and I appreciate you coming over to our session. I'm Rob Williams. I'm an engineer in the remote desktop virtualization team. And unlike some of my peers on the team, I don't actually get to write the code or specify the product. Instead, I get to work with our partners that build servers, that build GPUs, semiconductors, and thin clients to use our software. So I'm an engineer, just like a lot of us, but my role is entirely outwardly facing.
And welcome. I'm Karthik Lakshmi Narayanan. I actually work on the inbound side. I work with taking the customer feedback and data, looking at competitive analysis, and I author the product roadmap, author functional specifications, and then work with the engineering team to bring those features to market. So we are here today to talk about RemoteFX thin clients. I hope many of you had a chance to attend the previous session where we talked about our RemoteFX investments in Windows 8 in great detail. I think just based on the feedback and the reaction that I've seen, it looks like it's been a tremendous response. I think people are excited about what we are shipping. We are here to talk about the thin clients that we are enabling, and we'll structure our talk into three parts. We'll cover the why thin clients, in terms of why are they being used, what are the scenarios or use cases. We'll talk about what is a thin client. We'll also talk about what is the market opportunity or the business opportunity for some of you if you choose to invest in RemoteFX thin clients. And finally, we'll talk about the how. How do you go about building a thin client, a RemoteFX thin client? What information, resources, tools may be available that you can leverage in order to deliver that great experience for your customers.
So I want to set a little context about really who we're targeting this talk to. You know, Build is a new event for Microsoft, and we're bringing together a lot of the attendees from PDC. I'm sure many of you went to PDC in the past, developers, and then we're also bringing in WinHEC guys, people who are building hardware, all coming to the same conference. And we had to pick kind of our audience, so I wanted to let you know who we picked so you can think about that. We're really designed this talk for thin client OEMs. These are the brands behind thin clients, the guys that put their labels on the boxes and they're out there selling and marketing the devices. We designed this talk for ODMs, the device manufacturers who stand behind those brands to assemble and do some of the low-level engineering, and then of course the engineers that build the thin clients. But in addition to that, you know, those of you who are here to learn about some of the new user cases for thin clients and learn about really what Windows 8 and how Windows 8 remoting and thin clients kind of work together, the first half of the talk really covers a lot of that, so I hope there's a lot of value for you in that too. So the specific things that we want to talk about today, thin client scenarios. What are the user cases that Microsoft is targeting for remote desktop and thin clients? We're going to talk about the market opportunity, as Karthik mentioned. We think there's a great opportunity here for those of you who aren't yet in the industry to maybe step into the industry. And then we're going to talk about our investments, you know, the stuff that we've been working on in Windows 8 that we think is going to give a great experience to customers and help actually grow that opportunity. And then lastly, we have a lot of resources available and a lot of investments we're making in you, the thin client developer and thin client companies. And we want to talk and share with you what kind of resources we have, what we have today and what we have planned.
So, lots of good information that we'll cover, but we're hoping that you'll leave with two key takeaways. The first, we hope you'll have a clear understanding of what the thin client market is, what the business opportunity here is if you choose to make an investment. And secondly, a clear understanding of what resources are available, how do you go about in this process of bringing your thin clients to market for your customers. So let's get started. I'm going to focus on the first part of the agenda, which is why thin clients. What are the use cases, scenarios, customer requirements driving adoption of thin clients? So what's happening here in terms of the enterprise desktop space is that there is a wave that's sweeping, and there's a shift towards centralized computing. Now, Microsoft is a PC company, but ultimately what we are about is delivering a great desktop experience. So in the past, what's happened is you had desktops that were physically co-located the same location as your end user, and then your end user just accessed corporate resources in the data center. As an example, maybe a file server to get to some corporate data.
Right, and so we're just talking about a traditional PC on a worker's desk, right?
That's right, right? And just connect, and then you get access through your credentials and so on. So what's happening is that there is a shift now in the enterprise space where people are starting to think about taking your desktops, moving them onto a server, so getting your desktops on the server, and then moving the servers itself into the data center. So then you connect remotely and get your desktop experience. So again, here, what's actually moving is your desktop experience. So where are you getting your desktop experience from? In the past, it came from a PC that was with you right there, and now that desktop experience has moved into the data center. So that's centralized computing that's happening, at least for the enterprise desktop scenarios. So let's talk about why. Why are people moving towards centralized computing? Why are these desktops moving into the data center? So there are a few different reasons, but some of the strong ones there are compliance, centralization, and consolidation. So compliance, many governments have specific regulatory requirements that enterprises need to meet, and it's a lot easier if your desktop is just in the data center. Secondly, you have centralization. So what's happening is if you have desktops that are distributed at all the different locations, so let's assume you have a bank and that has a bunch of branch offices, and if there's a problem with the user's PC, you either require an IT pro physically located in that location or being able to get to that PC. But if your desktop instead is in the data center, then it becomes a lot easier for the admin or the IT pro to manage that desktop, maybe fix it, or even give you another desktop while they're fixing yours. So there's a lot of advantages from a management standpoint and an end user productivity standpoint to centralize your desktop. And you also get better utilization or consolidation of resources. You can pack a lot more users if you ran them from a server. So these are the key reasons that is driving centralized desktops. Microsoft provides a couple of ways for you to deliver that experience. We call it session host, virtual machines, or VDI, and 1:1. So let's take a closer look at each of these. So session host server, we call this remote desktop session host. We've also called it terminal server in the past. But in this case, what happens is you run a server operating system, and every user, you have multiple users connecting to that server, and every user gets a server-based desktop. This works really well for low complexity workloads, and it requires far fewer resources. So it's very efficient from a resource standpoint, and it works very well for lower complexity. If you're just doing some if you don't have basic applications, you don't have rich multimedia and stuff like that, it tends to work better. But you have...
And I want to point out that looking back, this is really the dominant portion of the market. So looking at where we were in the past, really session host server was really where we saw most of our desktops being deployed and utilized. And one other important thing is in this environment, everybody's desktop is actually coming from the same operating system. So everybody's got a process on that operating system running on that piece of metal.
Right, and because it's a server operating system, you can have some application compatibility issues. If you have some line of business applications that only work, say, on Windows 7, for example, you might have some problems running it from a terminal server or a RD session host server. The other choice or option, and this has been on the rise, is virtual machines, and it's commonly referred to as VDI, or virtual desktop infrastructure. In this case, you still run your desktops on a server, but you have a hypervisor, and you run instances of what we call the client operating system, so something like Windows 7 or Windows 8, and each user gets a client operating system. So you get much better application compatibility, and you also get strong user isolation because the IT pro is able to provision a set of resources that are fixed that you always get. So if you have other users on the same box and they're running some resource-intensive applications, your experience is not impacted.
Right, and so this is me as a user having my own operating system running on a hypervisor in the data center. Nobody else is on that OS or that machine but me.
Great.
Right? Or that OS, everybody's on the machine because of the hypervisor.
Right. And then we also have the 1:1 scenario. We call this 1:1, but here what happens is you still get a physical desktop that's assigned to you. There's no server operating system, that sort of a thing, but you still have a physical desktop, but it runs on the typical configuration, tends to be a Blade PC, a Blade server, and then that Blade server is now hosted in the data center.
Right, and this is where we see a lot of our customers in the financial community, where they have traders. They want a full machine dedicated to that trader. There's one OS running on it, and they need to, of course, get access to it in a one-to-one fashion.
Right, and another example could be engineering-intensive applications. If you have OpenGL or engineering-intensive applications that require a lot of resources, some organizations choose to do a 1:1 deployment. Anyway, these are all choices that are available, and they give you the same benefits.
All right, so Karthik talked a lot about the scenarios of centralizing computing in the data center. And that is really important for a lot of our IT administrators. You mentioned things like compliance, dealing with HIPAA, dealing with always these continuing new government regulations has always been a challenge. But there's a whole other class of users that we're working with for remote desktop and that we support with thin clients, and that's really education and small business customers. In this environment, though, instead of protecting data in the data center, this is all about delivering the best experience to the largest number of users for the fewest dollars. If you're a school district, today, of course, we open the newspaper. It's all about school districts. They need money. They're really suffering. But they need to train our workforce of the future. So they need to deliver desktop experiences to as many students for as few dollars as possible. And for that, we've built Windows Multipoint Server. Windows Multipoint Server is the same core of Terminal Server, but it's really targeted towards educators and small businesses. It's targeted towards an environment where you don't need, say, the redundancy of a device in the data center, where you don't necessarily need things like lights out management. So a lot of that cost can be removed, and then it's really, you could think of it as a PC delivering 20 desktops to 20 students.
Right. The other thing that you get, though, is also, the whole management interface is catered towards the teacher, who's typically not a technical person.
Right, yeah, so that's also a really good point. Certainly your average educator, he or she's got to worry about lesson plans and things like that. They're not ready to manage a computer in the data center by any means. So we've built a user interface in Windows Multipoint Server to make it easy for an educator to set up a machine and to deploy the experience to 20 students, 10 or 20 students. We've also made it really easy for them to do things that they need to do that maybe in a corporate network it's either illegal or it's not desirable, like watch what the students are doing. So we've got a user interface in Windows Multipoint Server where a teacher can sit at their desk and get a view of a thumbnail of all of the students in their computer lab, make sure that the students are, well, first on task. As a student myself, I know that's can be a challenge, former student. But also, students that get stuck on stuff, right? And so they can see the thumbnail of the students and they can go over and help somebody and help that student. But it's all about giving them that same Windows experience for the lowest dollar per student.
So Rob, it's been about 15 minutes since we started the talk. We said this was a talk about thin clients. I don't think we mentioned thin client
right,
once.
so we haven't mentioned thin clients yet, and I do want to thank the AV guys in the back. When I came up here, I noticed that the clock was a countdown clock, and Karthik and I had planned everything on a count up clock, and he was able to switch it for us, so thank you. It's actually been 13 minutes, and we haven't talked about thin clients. But the reason we wanted to cover all of these scenarios for you is because we wanted you to, kind of paint a picture of all the different ways people are using Windows desktops. And there's a big challenge with these methods, right? Does anyone know what happens when you put all the computers in the data center? Anyone? Everyone shy? Come on, where's a hand? No one. Tom? We sell lots of servers. Okay, that is a challenge, meaning we sell less PCs. But no, the real challenge, besides just that, is that we've got the machines in the data center. How do the users get the screen, right? How do the users interact with the machines? Those are actually kind of the tough problems that our team has been solving for like the last 10 years, right?
Yep.
And so there's a couple ways we do that, right? One, we've built this RDP protocol. We're building RemoteFX into Windows, right? But we also have been working with our thin client partners to deliver that same experience on a thin client. So I want to talk about what is a thin client. How do we think, at Microsoft, how do we think about thin clients? Well, one of the first things that we think about is we think about the intent of the device. This is an appliance. This is a device that has a single purpose, and that purpose is to connect with resources on a server. By itself, it has very limited or no utility. So if the device gets stolen, gets taken home, there's no information on the device, and it also can be much more simple to manage because it's such a basic device. Some of the profiles of this device, we think of a device that has traditionally lower CPU than what you would see in a full desktop machine, lower GPU power, lower memory, small amounts of storage. And when you have things like that, you can do things like passively cool the device. So you don't have spindle fans that can lower reliability. You don't have spindles on hard drives, which also lower the reliability. So it really allows an IT administrator to deploy a device that's got a higher MTBF and really requires less maintenance. Now, lastly, these sort of devices typically run embedded operating systems. So they're running versions of Linux or maybe an in-house embedded operating system. At Microsoft, we also have Windows Embedded Standard, which is an embedded operating system that's used on a pretty decent size part of this market. So those kind of thin clients are really the devices that are built by a lot of the established players, companies like HP, Weiss, Igil, Devon IT, right? These are the kind of the big established players right now, and others too. And then there's also some upstarts that are out there going after the RemoteFX market, thin client market, companies like Cloudium, ThinLinks, CloudView, right? So these are all these purpose-built appliance devices that solve that tough problem of how do I connect to this remote data store.
So, let's take a look at some, industry research at how end users are connecting to these centralized desktops, right? So here's some data from Gartner that talks about the mix and how clients or endpoint devices, what kinds of endpoint devices exist in the enterprise. So what you see here is, the 4 categories here. You have thin clients, which is the blue in the bottom, and then you have your typical desktops, then you have laptops, and then you have repurposed PCs. So PCs that are being reused purely as thin clients. So if you see, in 2008, it was mostly repurposed PCs. But if you see how this is shifting, the bottom blue, that's the thin client, and that's going up. The reasons are, just as Rob mentioned, these are purpose-built devices. They typically have fewer moving parts. They're easier to manage. They cost less compared to PCs. And frankly, just the management costs and the simplicity around this is making it more attractive. So when people are upgrading or going through the upgrade cycle, instead of building repurposed PCs, what they're doing is they're making a new order for thin clients, right?
Right, and like when you look at here and you see 2008 and you see a large amount of PCs being used as endpoints, right? These are full Windows machines connecting to the resources, but those have all the, a lot of the problems that I mentioned earlier. They have spindles, they have hard drives, they have fans, and really I think IT administrators have recognized they don't want to maintain that device plus maintain yet another instance of a machine in the data center.
Right. So they don't want the dual management headache. So what exactly is the opportunity? So if you take a look at 2013, hello, oh, there you go. So you look at 2013, 35% of all endpoint devices, they expect it to be thin clients. This is Gartner research based off 2010. November 2010. So, 35%, that's a pretty healthy number, and as you can see, it's kind of growing. 2014 is supposed to be higher. So let's take a look at 35% of what, right? So here's some more industry research, again, Gartner data, the same November 2010. But here's, the data here talks about how thin clients are connecting, or to what kind of workloads are they connecting to. So the light blue here is the server-based computing. This is the remote desktop session host, or the terminal server style desktop. And then you see the dark blue is what we typically call VDI. This is the virtualization. This is when you connect to a client operating system running on a hypervisor. And as you can see, up to 2010, there's hardly any VDI deployments. But VDI is expected to grow in a pretty rapid pace in the coming years. And as a result, that's directly translating into expanding the pie for thin clients as well. So what are the total units? Again, 2013, 12 million units, right? So this is a pretty sizable opportunity, 12 million units of pure thin clients shipping in 2013, connecting to terminal server or VDI.
Right, and it's 12 million units, and we're really talking about just like 18 months from now, right? And these units are, unlike some other things in the PC industry, these can be a little higher margin right now. So this is a good opportunity and something that you definitely want to consider when entering this market.
Right. So, I promised that we'll have two takeaways, so here's the first of the two. Here's the business opportunity. Thin clients, 12 million high margin units in 2013. So let's jump to the third part, which is about how do you build these clients?
Yep. Okay, so we've talked about the user cases. We've talked about kind of the stuff that we're targeting when we develop our software. We've talked about what our analysts are saying could be the market potential in I guess 18 months, something like that. Now, how do you get there? How do you actually build a Windows 8 type RemoteFX thin client? So, see, I have to point to the TV like it's an IR. Okay. There are two components that we think of when it comes to building a client. There's the codec piece. This is the one of the hard problems when the device is far away is getting the screen small enough that you can deliver it over whatever mechanism to the user. So that's where the codec piece comes in. And then there's the protocol, how we actually move that screen to the user. And then also how can we take the user's information, their keyboard, their mouse, their webcam, their input, and push it back to the system. So when you're designing a RemoteFX thin client, you really need to look at both of those. And you can look at those, I think you should look at those independently as far as what you're going to do. So codec. So the codec, it's funny actually, a lot of us are not necessarily, I think a lot of us know what a codec is, right? But the actual definition of the codec, I often have to look it up. So I went to Wikipedia, which is the true source of all knowledge, and it said to me that it's a compressor-decompressor, not a coder-decoder. It's a compressor-decompressor. The compressor part is what we do on our server side. The decompressor part is what you'll do in your thin clients, right? So in Windows 8, for those of you who were here earlier, you heard a little bit about this in the prior talk from Nadeem. In Windows 8, we've added RemoteFX adaptive graphics, where we have something we call adaptive encode, and we use diverse codecs. So this is all about getting that screen from the data center, or maybe even from the machine in the corner of the classroom, and delivering that content to the user. So adaptive graphics. Adaptive graphics is about looking at the network and the CPU, and then choosing, right, how we actually encode and how we cache based on that network and CPU conditions. We then select codecs, and we take into account, certainly things like the network and CPU, but we also look at the content that's there. And we think that by looking at the content, we can choose better codecs. And it's really about giving the users the best experience possible in the bandwidth that we have available, right? So we want to get that high quality experience. We think by doing it based on content, that can help. And then we want to also consider how much bandwidth do we have, how much can we use. And then lastly, with RemoteFX and Windows 8, we have the multimedia remoting that some of you are probably familiar with, where we take things like Media Foundation and Direct Show, and we take data and send it. Basically, we don't decode it on the server. We actually just send the content for decode on the client. So we still have that. But we also have a new mechanism where we can transcode content. So instead of, say, capturing Flash and trying to hand it over to the client where you'd have to implement Flash and decode it, or Silverlight, and instead of intercepting all this content from a browser and trying to send it to the client, what we'll do is we'll actually render that content on the server, and then we'll recognize that it's video, we'll re-encode it with H.264, and then send it down to the client. So, once I said, again, it's really about delivering the best experience possible given the network and CPU that we have available for the user.
So if I have YouTube or Hulu content that's running in my IE browser, it's going to look better in Windows 8.
Exactly. And it may actually look pretty similar to what it looked in Windows 7, but you'll see a much lower bandwidth utilization, right? Or if you're on a bandwidth-constrained network, it'll absolutely look better. So with our codecs, you have a big design decision. The first decision that you're going to have to make actually when you're building your thin client is, are you going to build the codecs yourself, or are you going to buy them? Microsoft is here to support you either way you choose. If you want to just go out and work with a vendor, we're there to help you. If you want to actually build it yourself, we're here to help you. So I want to talk a little bit about building codecs and what resources we have available for you if you want to build it. We have the RemoteFX Codec License Program. This program has been around for, I guess it's about almost 2 years now, something like that. We have a lot of licensees right now. This program gives people access to hardware and software implementations of RemoteFX. So we have the support through this program to help you if you're a semiconductor company who's interested in taking our codecs and building it into your chips, or we have the support available for you if you want to do software implementations. Maybe you have a DSP or a VLIW engine in your chip and you want to get the codec running on those chips. We have the software available to help you there. This particular program, it's a $0 per unit royalty. We make our money selling desktops. And so we think when you're building thin clients, you should be able to sell 12 million of them and pay us $0 for every unit, right? So we don't have a royalty associated with this. When you're selling your chips, there's no royalty that you have to factor into your cost. The program includes source code that hardware engineers need to integrate this into their chip. It includes source code that software engineers need when they're looking at doing an implementation, like I said, in DSP or VLIW. And then lastly, one of the most important parts is we have got a validation suite. This is what's going to allow your engineers who are building this into their chip to create test vectors to make sure that your chip is ready when you go to tape it out, and also your software engineers to create all of those test passes, all of the sample data, so that you can be sure that your implementation got it right, and when the end user takes your device and puts it at their end, that they get represented on their screen really exactly what we've encoded and what we intend for them to see.
Great.
Now, if you don't want to build it yourself, we also have some options. So we work pretty closely with hardware and software partners to bring solutions to the thin client market. I mentioned earlier my job is outwardly facing. I spend a lot of time with these guys helping them get stuff ready. From a system on a chip standpoint, we've been working with AMD, who has an embedded Fusion chip with a GPU to increase the speed of RemoteFX on that chip. We work with Intel on the Atom, and we also have been working with companies like Texas Instruments on their DSP. All three of those companies have design wins now for RemoteFX in thin clients. We have discrete decoder options. So we're working with companies like Cloudium and CloudView to build these accelerators for RemoteFX codec, so that you can take your thin client and you've got a single chip that you can put down and really decode RemoteFX content in our codecs incredibly fast, right? So from a hardware standpoint, there's a lot of guys out there, or a lot of companies out there that could provide resources for you. And then on, let's see here, on the software side, we work closely with some of the open source community, some of the open source projects. FreeRDP is probably one of the leaders, or is the leader in some open source software for RemoteFX. The program is being run by a guy named Mark. He's doing a great job, and there's a lot of investment that's going into FreeRDP right now. So from an open source standpoint, there's software available that you can use in your product. And then lastly, we work with independent software vendors, companies like PathPartner, who are taking our codecs and making an implementation that runs fast on anybody's hardware. And they have commercial support and commercial availability in their product too.
So if there are folks here in the audience who want to go down this buy option, then they can talk to you and you can help them make some intros, and you can help make some intros for them? Or?
Yeah, I think that's, generally speaking, the way it works is, I do blog. I blog a bit about my partners and what they're up to and what they're doing and what's publicly out there. But when you're looking for a provider for the codec, or you're looking for semiconductors, one of the easiest things to do is just come up and see me after the talk, or if you're watching this online, send me an email and I can get you introductions to the right people in the right companies. And so you can get an idea of really what's going on there. So it really comes down to, on the codec side, how are you going to get the codec in your device? Are you going to buy it or are you going to build it? Either way you go, Microsoft is here to help you and support you. So, I mentioned from a codec standpoint, or thin client, we've got the codec, and then, which is all about taking the screen, and then we've got the protocol, and we put them together on the thin client. Before we get into the protocol, I know it's like 30 minutes after lunch. You guys are pretty quiet. Can I see some hands up? Okay, you guys are alive. So I actually looked for Red Bull, because we had a coworker who said yesterday, he pulled out a Red Bull. He's like, oh, it's over in the corner. So I looked for Red Bull, and I was going to hand out Red Bull. And everywhere we went at our lunchtime, right? And we're like, do you have Red Bull? And they're like, what? No. So anyway, we have nothing to provide to kind of... So I do appreciate you coming here after lunch. We're 30 minutes in. We're going to talk now about the protocol, and then talk about kind of the resources that we've got at Microsoft to help you put this stuff together, and then we'll have questions. Okay? Okay. Karthik, it's you, man.
All right. So let's talk protocol. Okay, so with Windows 8, and with RemoteFX and RDP, we've always done very well with LAN type connections, but we've had a bit of a soft spot with WAN. But what we've done with RemoteFX and in Windows 8 is that just out of the box, your thin clients that may connect from a WAN type network. So if you have a branch office with a WAN type connection, high latency, that sort of a thing, it'll just out of the box with RemoteFX, you're just going to get that same good desktop experience over a WAN connection. The other element that's important from a desktop experience are access to devices. And with USB remoting, you'll get access to the same kinds of devices in a remote desktop environment as well. And finally, I know you've heard a lot about multi-touch at Build, and you're going to hear about it a couple more times in today's talk, but we've added multi-touch support. Our goal has been that you can have the same kind of an interaction with your desktop independent of if it is local or if it is remote, right? And that's been our goal, and we've done that we've enabled WAN, USB, multi-touch using adaptive transports, as well as dynamic virtual channels, right? So let's take a closer look at each of these pillars, if you will. So the first thing we've done is WAN enhancement. So I talked about just out of the box, your WAN connections are going to work. We've historically always used TCP as the transport. We've added UDP now. And this should help for certain use cases. An example could be if you had real-time content. So that sort of a thing.
Well, this is also good for when people are across the WAN and they've got a higher latency, lossy network. TCP really isn't the best protocol for getting as much content as possible across that network, right? So it was important for us to use UDP.
The other thing we've done is, this is something that partners have asked us and thin client companies. We made it easier to connect to your desktop through the remote desktop gateway. We've made some changes and we've simplified the protocol that should, the benefit should be there for all the thin client companies. USB redirection, this was actually a feature that we added in Windows Server 2008, R2 Service Pack 1, the ability to remote your devices. You could just connect a USB device to your endpoint device. It shows up as if it's installed inside your virtual machine, and then you can just interact with it and your apps can use it the same way. We did that only for VDI. We did it specifically when you added a RemoteFX virtual GPU. What we've done in Windows 8 is we've extended that support. We've made that broadly available for the other types as well. So if you have a session host, you can use USB redirection. And if you have a 1:1, you can use it as well.
And I want to mention that if you've implemented USB redirection in 7.1, for just VDI in mind, it's going to just work out of the box for session host.
Right. So multi-touch, right? So the idea is that you can now, if you've been here for the previous session in the same room, you guys saw the demos, and you've seen that rich experience that we're able to bring in a remote desktop environment. And we can also remote independent of whether you have a Metro-style desktop or you have the traditional desktop. We can remote that as well. And you'll see all these benefits just out of the box, again, with RemoteFX in Windows 8.
Yeah, so you can build all of this multi-touch into your thin client.
There are a set of additional features and resources that are available to thin client implementers. And if you're thinking about the protocol, the first thing we have is we have a rich community. It's very active. We have some web forums that you can participate in. You can read other questions and answers over there. You can post your own questions and get some assistance that way. We also take a lot of pride in documenting our protocol. We try to be pretty thorough about it, and we make that broadly available. So that's available to you as a reference. Another reference that you have is our client porting kit. It helps you we use some source code that you can use more as a reference to make your own implementations. We have rich interactions with the community. There's an open source community, and they are implementing, for example, RDP. Rob talked about free RDP being available as an option. It supports RemoteFX today. We also have some commercial implementations that are available. So we have some partners like HLW, Cloudium, and Thinlinks that make their versions of RDP available for various platforms. Again, you have the same kind of options like with the codec. You can build or buy. So if you're a thin client company, you can choose to have resources in-house that builds RDP 8 and RemoteFX for Windows 8, or you can choose to work with partners and license their implementations for your platform.
All right, so we've talked a lot about on the codec side, you need that piece. Here's a couple of options. On the protocol side, there's a couple of options. So let's imagine that you're going to buy a semiconductor from one of our partners, and you're going to build the software piece for RDP for yourself. What kind of resources does Microsoft have for the RemoteFX thin client, right? And once you're putting it all together. Well, we have the RemoteFX logo program, and I'll talk a little bit about the details of that. We have plenty of RemoteFX resources where our team is there to help you guys. And we also work closely with some turnkey ODMs that can help you really build the entire thin client if you want, and I'd be happy to introduce you to some of those if that's the way you want to go. So on the logo program first. Well, we created the logo program because we were looking for a way that we could help you communicate to a customer that a device was RemoteFX ready. And I know there's a lot of users also in the audience, so the logo is something that I would encourage you to look for when you're buying a thin client or a RemoteFX thin client. The logo, what it really says, or what we wanted to communicate, is that this device out of the box is ready to run RemoteFX. That means that the device is going to connect and work with those user scenarios that we talked about earlier, session host, VDI one-to-one, and then also the education experience with Windows Multipoint Server. So out of the box, it'll work with those. It also means that the device is going to meet a minimum performance quality on decode. And so this is important for us so that we can have an experience where users who have a multimedia, you don't need to run, it's okay. So we could have users who have a multimedia type experience of what they're expecting, right? They're buying RemoteFX, they want to have a certain level of experience, so we have basic performance requirements there. So as a customer, look for the logo. Device vendors are just learning about it now, but you're going to start to see devices with this logo probably towards the end of the year. Other resources that we have beyond the logo, right? Some really important things. Karthik mentioned the documentation. Our team takes a lot of pride in our documentation, and you know, engineers don't like to document things, right? But at Microsoft, we really understand that a lot of people want to connect to our servers, and they want to understand what sort of client-server protocols are there. And so we've invested a lot in documenting the protocol for RDP. The Windows 8 implementation of our documentation is going to be available this fall, so you'll be able to see all the protocol stuff there. Another really important thing that we've done, or where we invest in around documentation, is the doc help team. And I've put their email address up here because they actually love to get emails. They seriously don't mind. They want to get the engineers to send them emails. This team, their whole goal is to help you when you're developing RDP, is to help you understand our protocol documentation. When you implement something and the server isn't responding the way the docs say it should respond, you know, it might be a doc bug, it might be ambiguity in our spec, or maybe it's just something where you misread a reference. The doc team is there to help you. And in order to do that, the doc team also provides netmon parsers. Netmon is our packet sniffer, our Wireshark implementation. And they've got netmon parsers that are there that'll help you diagnose your RDP connections. And in fact, when you contact doc help about an issue in the spec or an issue with the way the server's responding, one of the first things they'll probably do is have you collect network traces with netmon. So that's a tool that's there. It's actually a community-supported parser, so it's as part of the Microsoft open source community effort on the netmon parser. So that's available. And then lastly, for those of you developing the RDP protocol, we have the Open Specification Forum. This is a community forum of engineers where you can get together online, you know, bulletin board, whatever you want to call the type system, and you can communicate either under your own name, a pseudonym, anonymously with other RDP developers. And it's really a great way for the RDP development community to get together, talk about the protocol, talk about how our server or clients are interacting, and really help each other improve our products. So the doc help team, I know they also spend a lot of time on there monitoring that and working with you. So for your engineers who are working on RDP, you know, go ahead and send doc help if you want kind of a private one-to-one communication. Send doc help an email. If you want to have more of a community experience, go check out the Open Specification Forum. And RDP is one of the biggest topics there. Then lastly, on this, and I mentioned earlier, I think about how, you know, we really have this vested interest in you guys being successful with your thin clients. We now have started to hold events specifically for RDP, the independent RDP developers and the RDP community. We had our first event in June of last year, and we had which was the largest gathering of RDP engineers, you know, outside of Microsoft. They all came we invited them all to our Redmond campus, and we spent 5 days with our developers and these developers all working together, talking about RDP, talking about the behavior of the protocol, helping people do some debugging, things like that. And we're going to do the same thing for Windows 8. So, you know, for those of you here, those of you listening on the webcast, in the first half of next year, we're going to have our Windows 8 RDP Summit. Great chance to come in. I mean, I think Nadeem, who gave the last talk, came to our event, and he'll be there next time. And it's a good chance to really talk to our developers and get through a lot of questions on Windows 8. And then after that, in summer of next year, we're going to have something like a Logo Fest. We used to call these Logo Fests at Microsoft, interop events, where you can take your thin clients, be it a software or hardware thin client, bring it in. We're going to work with you to help make sure you can get through all of our logo requirements and help you if there's any additional questions and really be able to do that sort of interop thing. And it's all about really getting these thin clients ready for our next wave of the Windows operating system.
So Rob, these are lots of great resources. Microsoft does not charge you as a thin client company for any of these, right? So why don't you walk the audience through what their cost may be?
How that works, yeah. So for these events, well, first of all these resources are available on the web. You can just access them. You don't even need an MSDN subscription or anything to get access to our protocol specs. You just go to MSDN, you can get them. When it comes to doc help, you just send email. So grab whatever email address you want, send it. There's nothing, you don't need to have any, there's no sign up, there's nothing like that required. You don't need a live ID or anything. And just send doc help and they'll start helping you immediately. The open specification forum, it's open for everybody to read. If you want to post, I think you do actually need to have you need to go through some sort of sign up mechanism to actually post on it. And then the events are also free. So you can come to the event, Microsoft sponsors it, and we buy like lunches, and we throw a little party for the guys and everybody that comes and stuff. But it's completely sponsored. So the only thing you need to do is for your engineers that are coming, you need to fly them over to Redmond, where I don't even know where we're going to hold it. But yeah, probably Redmond. You need to fly them there and take care of basic travel stuff. But otherwise, it's available. But these are really targeted for the RDP developers. So for those of you, the end users that are out there, hopefully what this will mean to you is that you're going to get higher quality thin client devices, so that when you deploy these devices in your company, you can be sure you see that logo. You know that these developers spend a lot of time with our developers, and we work together to build what I hope is a great experience for you.
Right, so let's go back to the agenda. We just covered the how. The other part was the what, and what is a thin client? It's a purpose-built device that's used for centralized desktop scenarios, as well as focusing on the enterprise desktop and small education vertical. And finally, why thin clients? 2013, 12 million high-margin units. So please get started in building your clients and getting a piece of that share. With that, we want to open it up for questions. No questions?
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead, please.
Hey. Welcome.
So I have a question around the operating systems.
Sure.
You mentioned earlier around CP7 and some of the stuff, and obviously Windows 8 is focused on ARM as well. Just wanted to get your thoughts on that in terms of how Windows 8 would fit in this picture on the ARM specifically there. And then a sub-question on that is around devices and how hardware acceleration on the specific thin client devices might be utilized in any.
Okay, so the first question was about operating systems that are being used. We do have, on the operating side, we have Windows CE, Windows CE 7 thin client package. We have a Windows CE operating system that's available today for RemoteFX, which is our 7.1 release. We haven't talked about or announced anything about a Windows 8 compatible version of that. We also have Windows Embedded Standard. And that's another group, and unfortunately I can't disclose any of their plans, so I can't talk about Windows Embedded Standard. What I can say, though, is that I know on Microsoft OSs, we typically are, from what I remember in research, and I'm sorry I can't give you the source, I think it's like 40 to 50% of the thin clients that are out there are running our OSs. But then there's also the other OSs, right? All the custom-built operating systems, the Linux operating systems. So there really is kind of a wide range of OSs that are there. There's also third-party applications that run on other OSs, other commercial OSs, right? So third-party RDP things. So really wide range of OSs. Anything really can be supported because RDP is, or RemoteFX is an application on top of that. Now the next question was about acceleration, right? And so acceleration is a big part of, I mentioned some of our SOC partners, right? And one of the big things that brings them in to this market and makes them valuable is their ability to decode RemoteFX quickly, right? And that's where like the AMD Fusion chip comes in, Texas Instruments with their DSPs. So those guys build the DSP, or in the DSP, they build, or the SoC, they build RemoteFX into the chip for acceleration. When it comes to using that, it's all about your software stack. I know CE can offload RemoteFX decode to a chip. So it is possible. It's definitely possible, but it's all about the software stack. Does that cover it? Okay.
Other questions?
No.
Do you have a timetable where Windows 8 by itself, like compatible for ARM form, would support RemoteFX?
When it ships. Actually today.
Okay, so the RDP client and this guy is RemoteFX?
Yeah. So you guys are lucky. We didn't get those. As speakers, they only give us like our little badges. But so,
RemoteFX ships, as part of Windows 8. So yeah, when it ships, you'll have all the RemoteFX capabilities we've talked about in the previous session, and this one, it's all available in box.
But on the Nike, or I don't know what it's called, on the Samsung, I think it's there, right? Nadeem, do you know? Yeah. It's there. It's implemented. It's running, right?
Yeah. So there's no additional work for Windows for RemoteFX.
This man is the man to blame if it doesn't work. Not
or
me.
high five as well. Go ahead, please, Tom.
Can you go into a little more detail about the RFX logo program?
Yeah.
Exactly what that?
Yeah. So the program is.
The question is about the.
Yeah. So the question is the RemoteFX logo program and kind of what it means to our thin client partners. So the program itself is it's something where there's a large list of basically of requirements. I shouldn't say it's a modest list of requirements for the device. There's no submission cost or anything like that. But you need to take your device. You need to run through our list of certification requirements. We also have a performance test kit, and that test kit runs on the server and exercises the client, and then captures a log file of metrics. That log file is then sent to Microsoft along with the test certification information. And after we receive that, we'll release to you the EPS and the legal documents necessary for you to mark your devices. And it's up to you, optional if you want to mark the devices, boxes, but it can be used in marketing literature. It can be used on the device itself, things like that. Is that? A totally optional program. Absolutely. You can even use the stuff to make sure the device works great and then not use the logo. So you can think of it as both of an engineering tool, but also as something that could be used by your marketing team. Yes?
What is your take on RemoteFX for the cloud, like Azure, private cloud, or public cloud?
Well, the investments we've made in WAN certainly make the RemoteFX experience better in 8 for things like cloud deployments. I don't think we have anything we're talking about when it comes to actually like Azure or cloud-based desktops, but the technology and the RemoteFX protocol now for 8 gets us really ready to do that. Our focus is branch office still. It's mobile worker. It's somebody on like an LTE maybe connection, something like that. But it moves us in the direction for that kind of hosted experience. Yeah.
Are there any licensing restrictions on using the educational multi-point server in like an enterprise environment, say small groups or teams, or is that something where you really aren't going to condone that kind of behavior?
No, behavior's it's all good. No, there's an education specific version, but there's also a small business. So we recognize that sometimes like maybe a small insurance shop or something like that, maybe a small government agency, they want to have 10 desktops, to help like a branch or something. This is a great way for them to do that, and it should be a lower maintenance type thing. So some of the things we were talking about earlier, it's something you should look into. It is limited to 20 seats, though. That's one of the challenges of it. So if you're looking at a huge deployment, then you're looking at either a full remote desktop type system. But for more modest deployments, it could work.
Say, for example, say you're running multiple instances of that server for different groups inside of, say, like a bigger,
We even have actually a way that you can bring multiple instances together under one management interface. So we definitely expect that. But that, initially it was for maybe like a larger college type lab type thing. But we do have we have one management interface where you can manage multiple of these machines together as a group. Is there anything else? No? I think we have a few minutes left. I do want to remind everybody that there are surveys that you guys can fill out. You may be very familiar with these or not. We get measured on them, and kind of to sound like your car service guy, anything less than 10 is failure. So so just keep that in mind. But in all seriousness, though, if you can, any valuable feedback. I don't know if there's an open area where you can write in stuff, but that stuff we actually get and absolutely read. So any of that feedback is great, and we can use that to do a better job next time, or make sure we're covering the content that you guys want next time. So so please do fill in the surveys when you have a chance. And then if you also have any other questions, or if you want to come see us privately, we're going to be here. We're going to be available after the talk for a little while too. So
yeah, that's it. Thank you all for coming, and I hope you found the session useful. Thanks again.
Thanks, guys.